What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. So here we are on episode 64 of the show. Last week I was speaking with Andrew MacDonald, a UK commercial retail agent and broker who has, over his career of 25 years or thereabouts, seen the retail sector and in particular the high street struggle. And I think this struggle has become all too visible to pretty much every one of us. If you're in our, even though these guys are UK based, you can see it here in Dublin, and we have House of Fraser, we have Debenhams here in Ireland as well as the UK, and I have seen those shops close down in the last couple of years. And also we've had, Toys R Us and all these kind of large names that have been around for decades and if not longer, and suddenly they're gone. So my guest this week is a man on a mission to end that struggle with all these retail and high street stores. My guest is Alex Schlagman of SaveTheHighStreet.org. Now, Alex is very passionate about trying to save the high street, and he's built a movement around the idea, and a lot of people have gotten behind this movement, and I think it's a great idea. But I do think it's going to be a tough nut to crack. And I know that, I believe that myself, based on just my own experience in retail, and the fragmented ownership is just such a major challenge. I'll give you a quick example. I used to run a car park on Trinity Street in Dublin, and coming up to Christmas, we would always put, we wanted to kind of decorate the street, and we wanted to put the lights on the street. They always put lights on Grafton Street and various streets in the area, but they never did them on Trinity Street. So we got the idea, let's go and put Christmas lights up on the street and make the whole place kind of feel kind of very festive. And sure enough, we went out, we sort of got a price to do it, and we got all this kind of stuff, and it was going to cost X thousand, I can't remember the amount. And we went and knocked on all of the retail units on the street and asked would they contribute, so that we would basically divide the price between all of us on the street. And most people were very enthusiastic and said, oh yeah, that's great, it'll improve the image of the street and all that. But then one person says, no, I'm not interested, you guys go ahead. And of course he's going to benefit from it, but he's not going to be paying for it. And so somebody else notices that as well and goes, well, hold on, if he's not paying for it, why should I pay for it? And sure enough, 3 or 4 people drop out. So in the end, it was ourselves and a couple of other people that kind of stuck by the original kind of agreement. But there was at least 4 or 5 people that pulled out of it altogether. And so they got a free ride. And that is the kind of thing that creates the problems that makes what Alex is trying to do so difficult. So anyway, unlike, say, for example, a shopping center, and in the case of a shopping center owner, they're looking for overall success of the shopping center. And for that to work, it means all of the units have to work in unison. Whereas when you're in fragmented ownership and you're on a street or something like that, it only matters to the person who owns the shop whether that shop in particular does well. They couldn't care less whether the next door neighbor's making money or not. So anyway, without further ado, my conversation with Mr. Alex Schlagman. Okay, Alex, welcome to the podcast. How are you keeping today?
Yeah, always good. Thanks, Gavin. Thanks for having me.
Whereabouts does this podcast find you today? Where are you based?
So at the moment, I'm in West London, just slightly west of Notting Hill.
Good man. Okay. Well, I just wanted to, obviously we have an audience here who may have come across you, but some people who have not. Can you just summarize in a couple of sentences what it is you do? Who is Alex Schlagman?
Yeah, so nice to meet you all, anyone listening in, watching in. I'm one of the founding partners of SaveTheHighStreet.org, which is an industry-wide movement all around the transformation of high streets in the UK. So we're doing all kinds of stuff that relate to reinventing and reviving high streets. Our big thesis is that we need to change the high street to save the high street.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will agree with that. We're going to get into all of that, but just turning back the
Mm,
clock a little bit, I wanted to just to ask you if you can
mm,
give us a little bit of, your early backstory for some context. I mean, if we go
mm.
back to say either, finishing university, what was your first job, and just to kind of fill in some of the blanks for people.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I mean, at university, I set up my first tech business. I was involved in quite a few sort of entrepreneurial type things at university. Never really before that. I sort of came into my own a little bit when I went to university and sort of almost discovered business in a way. So, I mean, I was involved a little bit with the clubs. But then spotted really it was a sort of problem I was facing myself, which was that I didn't really want to buy the university books every year when I had all these other university books that I'd already sort of used and were never using again. Couldn't I sell them to my neighbors? And I suddenly thought it was sort of the era of eBay. I don't really want to sort of list everything on eBay and sell it around the world. Surely there's people nearby that want to buy things from me. So we basically launched something called Big Banana, which was a bit like Gumtree for students, and sort of rolled that out in Leeds and tested it as a rollout outside in the north as well in Manchester. And so built a sort of tech business in a way. It was like a messaging board, I think Gumtree for students really. And it started with this concept of university books, but actually much more popular were people listing, old furniture they didn't want to take with them. People started listing jobs and properties and all kinds of stuff. And we had local advertisers on the platform. And then I got involved sort of at the university time as well with a friend of mine who was wanted to start like a local media company, originally just a magazine, but we turned it into a broader based media company helping brands connect with students on campus. So I sort of helped build that at the same time. It's called Skint. And there was something I was involved in, which was I was approached by a network marketing guys around quite a sort of random proposition, utilities. And I stayed in Leeds after my undergraduate to carry on and studied marketing because I had Big Banana and I had Skin, I had these business interests as well, and decided to sort of take on a partnership with this network marketing company to rebrand their telecom services and sell it to football clubs. But particularly, I was hoping to get into Leeds United because I was up in Leeds, and
Right.
sort of resell their telecom services to the fans, and everybody would take a cut. So I wasn't really part of the network marketing scheme the same way. It was more like a sort of strategic partnership, and managed to get it sold into Luton Town actually. It was for my dissertation, for my marketing dissertation, my thesis in my masters, and so sort of rolled that out. So I was quite involved in stuff when I was at university, and then when I came back to London after my masters, I look back and we can talk about this stuff, but I didn't carry on with Big Banana, even though it had traction. I didn't feel like Skint was really mine because it was a sort of another person was the CEO, and I was more sort of helping a friend run that. But I just decided to make a clean break, closed it all down, came to London. I'd met a couple of guys who wanted to start a digital marketing agency for small businesses. And so the three of us really kicked that off. They had some funding already. I wasn't the CEO. It was a kind of very different experience to sort of later life stuff. It was a startup. I was founding team. It was very exciting. It didn't feel like the same kind of pressures you feel later on when you're really at the helm of it all. But it was an exciting journey, and we sort of built out a digital marketing agency helping small businesses. We did a lot of stuff with SEO. That was the big play. It was like 2006, 2007, early days of SEO, but we were helping small local businesses in and around London build their first websites and come online. And it was a really exciting journey, and we got it through to the exit to another ad agency. And then I worked for people for 4 or 5 years in that space, technology consulting, helping big brands. I built a specialism in retail for one of the largest digital marketing technology consultancies and agencies in the world. And I was sort of a young guy on this management team, and I was sort of brought in to sort of help fix a bunch of cultural clashes that were going on at the time because they'd acquired a whole bunch of agencies, and they thought that maybe I could sort of help fix it. And if I kind of look back, frankly, Gavin, I think I broke as much as I fixed in that period. but I learned a lot, and I met my co-founder, who ended up being one of the co-founders that became the business, which one of our trading brands is SaveTheHighStreet.org that I talked about earlier.
Wow. Okay. So I would, just having listened to that, I would describe that as kind of like almost serial entrepreneur, that you've gone from business to business
Mm,
to business and things like that. But obviously you took a break with some consulting and stuff. I mean,
mm.
what motivated you to get involved in the trend, your missions, you state your mission as to transform and strengthen the high street. Like what's motivating that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, I've grown up in a whole family of sort of retail. My grandfather was butchers in North London. My family were in the rag trade, my mum's side, and my dad as well was in that space. So I've sort of grown up around it. My first job's in that space as well. So working family, but also even beyond, and then built my specialism around it. So I was always really interested. And then in 2013, a big report was brought out by the government. A lady called Mary Portas, if you might remember, something
Hmm.
in. Was commissioned to look at a sort of plan to save the high street, and it was it was 28 points. And I looked through it all, and I was so close to this space here, and I was just like, oh my God, there's something really fundamentally missing from this. There was this whole thing around the internet and technology and innovation, but that wasn't in the 28 points. It was like that was the problem that we needed to address, and then we needed to solve it in other ways. But I'd come from a completely different standpoint. I saw the technology as a connector for local communities, as a force of good, and as an unstoppable force. Innovation is the one thing we cannot stop. If we think we're fighting innovation for the high street is doomed. It is the death of the high street. And this was around that era where the media had coined this phrase, the death of the high street. And so there's a couple of things going on in my mind. Firstly, I feel like sometimes when the media gets behind things like this, it creates the opportunity for contrarian truths, where a lot of people feel something, that they're right about something, which is actually fundamentally incorrect. And I felt we were really on the cusp of something really big around this. The concept that high streets weren't going to exist. I mean, people had got onto this because commoditized product retail was getting disrupted by Amazon, and they'd extrapolated that out, that town centers suddenly weren't going to exist. I mean, that's a massive leap of faith. So I was like, I don't believe fundamentally that's going to happen. I also believe that it should not happen, because high streets have a much broader role than just enabling businesses to sell to consumers. They're the places that people interact in the real world. It's a £337 billion property portfolio in the UK alone. It's got a real fundamental role in powering the local economy. Like, this isn't going to bend over and die. It's not going to this isn't going to happen easily. And a lot of people are going to want to get behind supporting a better high street, a future high street, a more digitally enabled high street, a better connected high street, a more dynamic high street, not the same high street, but a high street. So the real genesis, I think, of this was that people really believed that this was the death of the high street and it was coming, and we didn't. And we didn't believe it was a world we wanted to live into. And we believed it was a mission that not just we could get behind and be inspired by, the founding team I put together around this, but also we can get a lot of other people to support us. And even in the very early days, we were always very mission driven. Before SaveTheHighStreet.org launched, we were already doing stuff. We were already experimenting and iterating around different things that we could do to play a role. We were in a position to do SaveTheHighStreet.org and launch that in 2016 because of the work we'd done in 2014 and 2015. And even in those early days, before we had a movement, before I even knew what an industry movement was, and I can share a little bit about industry movements if that's useful, because we went on our own journey about learning how to start a movement dynamic and support the industry to drive things forward, not just us. But even back then, we were all about this. We were all about the why, not just the what and the how.
It
And
sounds like
so,
the it sounds like that report, the 28-point report, was like basically trying to hold back the ocean. I mean, it's
yeah,
like innovation is not going to be held back, and it's not going to be, told, that you can't disrupt this industry. It's just going to go ahead and happen regardless. And having said that, I mean, and I buy into your mission. I think you're right. But I've experienced my own, I invested in retail back in the early 2000s and the mid 2000s, and I did
mm,
very well on it. And I
mm,
just got in at the right time. and made quite a bit of money on it. And I go out, sometimes I pass the assets that I used to own. I went in, I rented them, I sold them, I made lots of money on the sale, and I redeployed that capital elsewhere. But I go past those shops that I sold, and a lot of them are sitting empty today. So there definitely is a problem there. And I mean, the past glory days of retail. I mean, where do you see the future for retail if we
Yeah.
look ahead? You know.
Oh, yes, it's really tempting to get into all the stuff that we think we need to do around vacant units, but I'll come back to that 'cause it's a bit specific. Let's talk a little bit about the future then, Gavin. If you want to start at that point there. So, really high level here. High streets need to become more intelligent, more collaborative, and more dynamic. It's the kind of highest level. Intelligence means that every high street needs a plan. Every business and operation within it needs a plan. There needs to be the right mix of uses. It needs to be dynamic in the sense that high streets need to change over time. We need to have the ability for use to change, but we also need the ability for even, individual units to change use from day to night. And actually we need to be much more learning from the internet, learning from stock markets, learning how does high streets meet the changing consumer needs, even on a weekly basis, let alone in real time, like, bidding exchanges and stock markets and the like. Yeah, so we need much more dynamism, much more ability in the system to change things. And the third is collaboration. And the reality is, we're all in this together. The success or failure of high streets impacts us all. And we've all got a role to play, and we can all benefit from this in lots of ways. We could talk about the specifics of that, but actually we need to work better together. Businesses on high streets need to work together because they're working on an overarching product called their high street or their town centre. Yeah, so they're actually working unified ways, can actually benefit each one of them by drawing more footfall in and having the right offer. Yeah, landlords, tenants need to work better together. It's a partnership. It's not going to work well if not. Banks need to be involved in this. The landlord, tenants, and lenders need to be working well together. Public and private sector need to work well together. So at the highest level, we have these three core pillars.
From my perspective, I see an awful lot of investors looking at retail, empty units, and thinking, okay, conversion to residential, but I don't think that's appropriate in most cases. So why don't you go into the six that you're talking about?
Yeah. So the first one, so I'll touch a little bit about that. We're going to need a new generation of high street entrepreneurs to fill some of the gaps that are left by national chains disappearing from the high streets. We know what's happened. Everyone here listening in is going to know about Topshop and Debenhams and these, big ticket storylines around high street failures. Behind the scenes, there's a lot of retracting going on from the big national chains as well. They're doing targeted tactical CVAs to reduce their store footprints. It's leaving a lot of gaps, and those gaps are not going to get filled by like-for-like operations. BHS will not replace House of Fraser. Debenhams will not replace BHS. That's not happening. So we need to find new businesses, a new generation of businesses, and broadly about 14% of independents open on the high street every year, and 14% disappear. So it usually keeps itself quite even, but we're really going to become more and more reliant on the independent sector in this next phase. So that's the first thing. So we need to identify and empower a new generation of startups that can plug the gaps and take advantage of the gaps in the market. Just because you don't have Carluccio's and Bella Italia on your high street now doesn't mean people around that catchment area don't want Italian food. So if you're an Italian restaurant entrepreneur, now's the best time ever to get into market. And I'll touch on some of the other reasons for that beyond just the obvious gap in the market, gap in demand and supply. Second thing I think is really important, I touched on it before, is that we need plans for high streets. Yeah, and not all high streets need to have as much retail as they did before. So we need to understand what is the right mix of uses in every single town centre, and actually recognise that to save some high streets, we need to shrink them. We need to have other uses, particularly around the edges, whether there's conversion into residential or other commercial uses. And I see a lot of applications for other commercial uses beyond Class E, beyond high street, which could be flexible office space in regional town centres and suburbs because people aren't commuting as much as before. And there's a topic we can talk and have talked at length about, Gavin. A last mile logistics warehousing space, real need to get products in the hands of consumers locally. We need more space for that. other commercial uses as well as residential around the town centre, bringing more consumer in with a smaller, more compact, well organised, well planned mix of businesses, more like what a shopping centre should be doing. You know, we need to treat every single high street, every single town centre the same way, and we need to keep it up to date. We need to have a dynamic data map of demand and supply so that we can evolve the uses within town centres on an ongoing basis. So I'm talking about plans, the next generation of plans for town centres, bottom up, use-based plans that evolve over time. Third area I talk about, I'm not going to go into too much, is collaboration, because I've touched on that as one of the broader points. You know, a couple of other things that I think are going to be really, really important is we need to really recognize that kind of innovation, like you touched on, is not going anywhere. You know, we need to embrace it, and we need to embrace a generation of innovators that are going to support high streets of the future. Lots of people building technology and innovations for the businesses, but also the wider ecosystem around it all, for places, for real estate, prop tech, lots of different opportunities. We need to embrace that and bring that forward, to encourage that change to happen in a positive way. And then the final point I'll touch on here, I think, is around, we are in a very, very interesting time. And clearly, from an asset class point of view, retail has underperformed relative to other asset classes within property and beyond. But this presents huge opportunity as well. And we're seeing really potential for a bit of a gold rush in terms of this asset class over the coming years for the people that get it right. So we've got on the market lots of large ex-department stores and units where people really, even today, do not know what to do with that space. But actually, there are uses of those spaces. We can talk a little bit about what we're doing to reimagine and transform those units into what we call micro malls, with indoor markets on the ground floor and mixed use schemes upstairs, with everything from flexible workspace to residential to hotels and beyond. You know, so there is an opportunity for real estate entrepreneurs and investors to come in and acquire those large assets, repurpose them, reimagine them into something that drives great capital appreciation, new rental income, and the opportunity to serve that local community in a way that this old Debenhams, this old Topshop, this old M&S, this old BHS was just sucking the life out of the high street sitting there empty before. Encouraging like a lot of local collaboration and support around this is another dimension on that specific opportunity. So something like that is good for the local area. So how do you get the local authority to support? How do you get the local community champions behind it all? How do you get the media behind it? How do you get the whole ecosystem locally to support your vision for reimagining one key asset in a town centre? What a great opportunity. Then I talk about, on another side, you know, we touched on high streets being too big. This is not a bad thing. You know, this is ultimately a real thing. And, you know, we may need to have less of certain types of operations on high streets in the future, particularly retail businesses who are commoditized today and cannot differentiate themselves to online. They cannot provide a niche. They cannot provide a value-added services. They fail to do that. Eventually, they will be disrupted and they will have to go. So they have to find a way to give consumers a reason to have that physical space. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Information services, very similar. Banks is the canonical example. What are you doing with that physical space beyond what you can do through your online banking? Yeah. So there's going to be certain types of high street business which will either have to evolve or die. And there's going to be lots of other new high street business opportunities coming in. But if we take the premise that we have arguably too much retail asset, got 500,000 units in the UK, give or take at the moment, there is an opportunity. And I understand why people in the property market, you know, are looking at the repurposing into residential as a great opportunity space. But I think there are others as well. And very often the right way to play this will be to say, not get rid of retail, but reduce the scope of retail within this particular asset, and actually still have some retail frontage on the ground floor, smaller scale, some use there. But actually, how do I make use of the space better beyond that, beyond retail? So I think a huge opportunity for trading and redeveloping high streets, regenerating high streets with a lot of support, not just us, but we're a kind of movement mobilizing a lot of this stuff. But, you know, there's a lot of central government money being thrown at regeneration. There's a lot of local government money. We can talk to people if they want to get in touch with me about how you can access this type of support, and a lot of wider non-pecuniary support you can get access to as well if you're doing good. And if you're doing good, you know, that doesn't mean that you can't make money as well.
It's, I mean, just peeling back some of the layers there on that. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is, I mean, you were talking about a high street plan, so to
Mm,
plan out who goes where, and I can relate to that because the project that I did in the south of Spain back in 2008, I remember I bought one or two units initially, and then I realized, hold on a second, if I open up, a certain type of shop, how do I control who opens up next door to me? How do I know it's not going to be a competing business or something that kind of drags down my tenant's business? And so I ended up going and buying the whole lot on the basis that I thought that if you have control over it, you could say, okay, I want to put one, Italian restaurant in rather than three competing and two of them, not doing particularly well and one sort of winning and cannibalizing the others. And then you want to have perhaps one sushi restaurant and one of this. So to kind of evenly spread it out. The problem is obviously on a high street is that you have so many different stakeholders, so many landlords. So you've got the local authority as well gets involved. I mean, how do you corral all of the different stakeholders to actually get that right? Because it is difficult to tell a landlord, no, you can't do that. This other person is going to do that. You're going to have to do this. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
yeah, of course. Fragmented ownership is one of the big sort of sort of structural challenges around this. And when you aren't dealing with it, I mean, let's look at some examples. I mean, anyone knows what Marylebone High Street. A lot of it's owned by De Walden. They own the residential around it all. They're able to invest in Marylebone High Street. If anyone was on Marylebone High Street 25 years ago, would recognise it being a very, very different place.
Yeah.
And actually, their long-term strategic investments in the high street offer enabled them, and look a long-term view of it, to substantially increase the residential values around it all, and actually drive, substantial opportunities around, risk reward sharing partnerships for the long term as well. So, you can take those positions if you have, the ownership. If you don't have the ownership, it is one of the big challenges. How do we bring people together? I mean, in terms of the how, there are certain things, and we haven't cracked everything, but we're working through stuff. But ultimately, you need to be able to align incentives. People aren't doing things out of the goodness of their heart. What I'm saying is you can do good and make money, from a private sector point of view. But you've got to demonstrate to people that actually this is in your interest, not just that you're some kind of altruistic entity helping a local community, because you'll always have some drop off. So obviously that principle applies. You've got to always work out what's in it for them. Then you've got to find like local, we call champions. So we've got a program, say the High Street called the Local Champions Program. It's about identifying those people who really care about their local area. And they could be anything. They could be a traders association, community group, business improvement district, busybody, agent. I mean, there's all kinds of people who want to be at the hub of everything. We all know them in the places we live. And ultimately, those people who, are on the ground in those places and really experiencing what it's like for, their town centre to succeed or not, obviously have a value add there. And there's been a big movement in the whole industry generally, what we call devolution, of power towards the local and empowering those local leaders. Some people like Grimsey will call them local leaders, Bill will, and I'll call them local champions. We're all talking about the same thing, really. We just sort of came at the same sort of group thinking at the same time. And I think we need to find those people who are going to do the corralling, who are actually going to be on the ground. We can play a role within it. The local authority plays a role within it. But that local champion on the ground has an important role to play. And then, I think there is opportunity. One of the big opportunities here for those who have the kind of capital to play with is around taking a sort of Gavin type approach in Spain and actually acquiring lots of assets. And if anybody listening into this is looking to do that, drop me a line. We can talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing people do in the UK around this larger regen projects. Clearly, local authority needs to be involved in this at some level. In some cases, the uses I've got are actually local authorities providing a lot of the capital with big property sector interventions in town centres. But from a private sector point of view, if you can get to that point where you're saying, well, actually, there's a lot of distressed asset, or even getting to that point asset, where it could be heavily undervalued in a scenario that we can turn this town centre around, the upside potential for people with the ability to access that type of capital on a larger scale, longer term scheme is huge, because we're at that point at the moment where fear is driving opportunity. Typical sort of Warren Buffett stuff, I think. It's like the market's scared, be greedy. And actually we do have one of those moments at the moment. So people who are willing to put, take conviction around, big upside potential, larger regen schemes in the same kind of vein as the way you were thinking here, which is how do I own asset across a high street here and take a longer term view? And ideally, as I said, just not think about it just as retail. You're not just buying retail asset here. You're buying a town centre, which is going to have a lot of different uses within it over time. So now is an opportunity for people who can access that type of capital, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree with you, because I always believed that, the choice that you put in, if you're a single landlord with a single unit, you only care about your single unit. But if you own a high street, the entire high street, then you take a much more holistic approach, and you'll be thinking that no, we don't want too many of that use. Whereas an individual landlord will just say, yeah, sure, if you want to sign the lease, but the plan of it is important.
Just one thing on that, Gavin, just as I didn't mention here, just like obviously with on the ground, when it is still fragmented, obviously it's important to kind of reach out to them and have a proposition. What we're doing here at SaveTheHighStreet.org is we're developing like a toolkit for owners, landlords, so that there's a free level of support where we'll just provide you insight into what's the right use for your asset here. If you've got a vacant unit, we'll help you fill it with a new tenant and try and obviously get sustainable occupancy, income, and obviously the implications of all of that. If you've got an existing tenant, we have a software platform which is being rolled out in the UK with local government funding to support local independent businesses. So if you've got an independent tenant in there, we've got a platform that will help them achieve their potential, so you get to higher income for themselves, which has a knock-on effect on you, whether or not you're on a turnover linked agreement today or not. And we can also help around that transition towards risk reward sharing, provide insight into what's the risk and potential, particularly of independent tenants, because covenant strength, what does that mean today? I mean, let's be real.
That's actually I was going to go there. I was actually going to say that, because there's the local high street near where I live, in Blackrock here in Dublin. There's 3 independently owned cafes, and they are doing incredibly well. If you go down there on a Saturday morning, there are queues around the block. And funnily enough, you go across the street and have a look at the Starbucks or the Costa or whatever, those are empty. And so people would rather stand in a line to buy coffee and a scone or something like that from one of the independent ones, rather than go to the likes of the Starbucks or the big kind of and so you have to question, because certainly the covenant of a Starbucks or a Costa is usually, I mean, if it's owned by the parent, is going to be far, far better than the independent. But the actual performance of the business and the value to the high street is very limited by the looks of it.
Yeah, look, expect change. It's not working. It's an old system. We've looked at it in terms of risk from one perspective, and today we're in a different world. Business comes out of street food market with a great social media following and buzz with no covenant strength.
Yeah.
And then you've got, large national 100-year-old retail chain, who's throwing around CVAs left, right, and center. Who's riskier? True. Who's riskier? Then you've got to ask yourself the question. So fundamental logic will start to play out. One of the things last year, I think I mentioned this to you as well, when we were in conversation with Bayes, Department of Business and HCLG last year, one of the big things I was saying is we need to really start to look at this. We need to bring the banks to the table, the valuers to the table, and we need to start to really look at the systemic challenges between tripartite relationships between landlord, tenant, and lender generally, but even specifically, how do we value? And let's get real here. Let's stop just saying, oh, this is what we used to do and this is how we do it. But let's start to build some more fundamental. And it's part of our mission. I think part of our business opportunity around this is we're collecting a lot of intelligence around this with the SME sector, getting to a point where we can kind of evaluate a business before they go into a space and ongoing. And I think, if we've got a world where there's more independence, we're going to need to do this in new ways. And so, we want to make sure that that this kind of intelligence exists in the ecosystem and that we can play a role within it.
you're obviously at the, at the coal face here in terms of the high street and stuff. I mean, what is exciting you at the moment, looking into the trends that are taking place? Is there any? I mean, just speaking from my own experience, I've seen ghost kitchens and micro
Mm, mm,
mobility and micro
mm.
warehousing. All of that kind of stuff is starting to creep in. Is there anything that you've seen that is particularly exciting as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, I touched on the micro more before, but I'll just reinforce that. So, larger units, we're not going to replace Debenhams with House of Fraser. What do we do with those spaces? And actually, there are pilots that we're involved in managing, and there are other examples you may have seen yourself in different parts of the UK where the ground floor becomes an indoor market where the ground floor basically space is cut up into lots of smaller units, and it houses, ideally if we're involved, a curated set of independents that have the space and support they need to succeed. And ultimately you get these businesses to apply for the space, you get them on rolling license agreements linked to turnover, you get the right mix of businesses. If it's not working for either party, you can swap them out and bring them in, and you start really curating that offer on the ground floor, turn them into vibrant indoor markets. And sometimes they're big and there's a big town centre and there's a need for a full mixed use space. Sometimes they're very small and it's maybe just a food market, or even in some cases certain verticals. You might have a little fashion space there's a gap in the market for, but it's lots of small operators on the ground floor. And then the uppers you turn into whatever the gap in the market is. Is it a hotel? Is it resi? Is it other commercial uses? One of our pilots in Peckham, going to check out marketplaces, flexible workspace, upstairs
I
there.
think that's a big one. All right. Yeah.
Such a
I think
great
it's going to be,
opportunity.
it's funny you say that because there's an example here in Dublin of this center that they created. It's like a retail center, but when it opened right at the height of the recession here in Ireland, it's called CHQ. And when it opened, there was almost every single unit. I mean, it has maybe say 40 or 50 units. Every single unit was closed. And just they couldn't find anyone to kind of go in, because nobody wants to be the first pioneer that kind of steps in, because why would you go in for just the one shop? So they ended up doing a deal with a company called Dog Patch Labs, which is kind of a co-working place. And those guys did so well because they were right in the middle of the Docklands, perfect location, and they've ended up expanding two or three times further and further into the space. But what it's created is this community of startup founders and stuff, and their staff, and what's happened is all of the food and beverage units that are needed for lunchtime and all that have started to spring up around it. So it's amazing what a catalyst can do, because that is now a vibrant space, whereas you couldn't find anyone to go into it for quite a while. So it is
100%.
interesting. Yeah,
100%, Gavin. I think you've got these schemes, these larger schemes here, and as I touched on it before, where there's a lot of people who are vested interest in seeing something like that succeed. From our point of view, we're sort of collaborative with everybody. We've always been a bit like this. It's part of our philosophy. The whole idea of a movement is all about bringing people together and partnering. We don't really see competition in that same way. We're very collaborative, and this is a great example of that, where whether it's working directly with a landlord and just making the whole ground floor work, or working with an operator that's taking a head lease and wants to sublet it out to other tenants, we'll do that. Whether it's a developer promoter who wants to do this in lots of different areas around the UK, we'll collaborate with you around that. There's lots of different ways of collaboration around this, and I think those types of schemes really get me quite excited when people get in touch with us about that, because I know there's a lot of different angles or ways that we can kind of plug gaps to make them a reality. And I truly believe that versions of that can exist in almost every town centre. And actually, if we go back to the other point here, you've got one of those in the middle of the town centre. You're providing a whole range of different interesting offerings. In a way, it creates the opportunity to repurpose more of the outside into other resi, because you've actually got a lot of the core offering, more than you were offering previously in the whole of your House of Fraser, is now being offered on the ground floor alone. So, you've got some really interesting kind of opportunities out of that. And the other one, I think the big one for me, is that sort of relates a little bit, because some of our recruitment for these things is around startups, but is startups. And I think, when I talk about startups, I'm talking about it as a startup on the high street. So actually, one of the most high profile startups on the high street last few years has been Amazon. And Amazon is actually And I was saying this years ago, look at the big online people, you think they're disrupting the high street. They're going to be on the high street. These people, their big frontier is about how they get to omni-channel, how they connect
Yeah.
the dots between online and offline in different ways. And they're all doing it. Alibaba in China, eBay partnering with Argos, Amazon was testing concept stores, long before they opened up in West London this year. It's like there was a lot of energy from the biggest online retailers in the world, even the smaller niche players, Bonobos, ASOS were doing pop-up strategies to get into the physical world. Like they were all looking at this. So I talk about startup in the broadest sense, from the person in a bedroom with an idea to the person in a bedroom selling through Etsy, to the person on the street food market, to the large online catalog retailers who want to come offline. And so, we're looking to support a whole new generation. I've got one of the largest catalog online retailers in the world, with an ambition to, set up a really interesting pop-up strategy to be on various different high streets we've identified as opportunities, with really interesting concept offerings in those high streets that kind of merge product, service, and experience for their target market, and join the dots between actually getting more people signed up to their database and on their catalog, and buying online to offline commerce, local fulfillment points for them. So like ambitious stories like that, all the way through to running a campaign with a local authority to basically identify who's got these types of offerings, because there's gaps in the market in this particular area. Leytonstone has a gap in the market for this. Do you want to offer this? We'll find you the space and support to help you succeed. And we've been running some pilots with shopping centre owners around this, where we basically get rent-free space between 4 and 12 weeks. We recruit the right business into that space to best meet the needs of that local offering. And actually, as you can imagine, with the shopping centre, fill the gaps and provide a better overall proposition for anyone coming to the centre. But in that 4 to 12 weeks, we're supporting that business to be as successful as possible on our technology platform, Joe, which has got the support and tracking involved in the whole thing. And in that period, we're effectively understanding what is a sustainable long-term agreement between landlord and tenant for this particular unit and this particular business. And can we help sort of broker it in that sense there? And if not, the tenant can leave and we swap them out for someone else until we find that business who's right to go into long-term occupancy. We basically turn vacant units into incubator spaces for new high street offerings to test them out and give them the support they need to basically get off and running. So I'm really bullish about like a whole new generation coming in, and I'm recognizing that the death of the high street from one perspective is the death of the old, and I think we need to be really positive around change and recognize that COVID-19 is a massive accelerator for change. There's nothing anyone can do to stop innovation generally, and it's being sped up by the big market forces and a pandemic that's hit us all in the last year. And actually, we've got to see the positives in all of this, which is a whole new generation comes in to a market that was really not performing. And now we've got an opportunity to get the right businesses in the right places doing the right things.
I have a question around car parking, because I have an experience in car parking. We built a car park building back in the mid-90s. And when we opened it, it did incredibly well. It was always packed. It was always like lines of cars trying to get into our place. And so for a number of years, we did extremely well. But then the local authorities started to try to push cars out of the city centre. They wanted to kind of reduce the congestion. They wanted to encourage people to take public transport, take bicycles, all of this kind of stuff. And it got to the point where a couple, I suppose 4 or 5 years ago now at this stage, we actually sold the business, and we managed to get out quite well, because a big developer saw it as a land acquisition strategy, and they were assembling a bigger site. But what's interesting about it is that now that COVID has happened, they've completely turned away from the original idea. They were going to knock the building down and turn it into an office building with some retail on the ground floor. And now they've actually gone back and they're looking at turning it into a kind of an outdoor restaurant, and using the actual floors of the car park as a kind of an outdoor. So it's very interesting to see the ingenuity coming back. But just going back to the original point, car parking in city centres and town centres and high streets, it does seem to be, the enemy of the local authority, and they do seem to be trying to drive people away. But is that not
Mm.
essential for a high street to thrive? Because, certain types of stores, you're not going to go home on a bicycle with a ton of stuff that you've spent the day shopping for. So you do need cars. It's kind of like a partnership in a sense. What's your view on that?
I mean, it's interesting. It's a very sensitive topic. It always was. I just remember when I used to do a lot of stuff on radio. You used to get the call in, to talk radio. I want to talk about this. We've got people, calling in. One of the first things that was always said, it's like, what about parking? How are you going to fix parking? And one of the things I always thought was like, look, it's one dimension of this, but there's a lot of challenges going on around high street. Parking is just one of those, and a lot of times it was a very emotional thing, a sensitive thing for people. There's a strategy that's sort of emerged, and it's not something we've led or been really involved in here, but strategies emerged to say, well, actually, there's going to be less cars. We're going to move into a world where people aren't going to own cars, and they're going to shift from renting cars into self-driving cars. We want sustainable local environments, so we need less cars anyway. So it ticks on that ESG box too. So we shouldn't be making long-term investments in cars. And sometimes people jump to that conclusion, and look, it can work. I mean, that's, we're deep in partnership with local authorities like Waltham Forest and Richmond that are really big on this kind of stuff, and others that aren't. But at the same time, what do I fundamentally feel? I mean, when you look at the data, there are some areas more so than others where accessibility from a car, and from a car point of view, generally has a bigger impact than others and needs to be addressed. And I just wish we'd be a bit more analytical with it. I wish every area was analysed in the same way, and we'd actually say, what, this actually is harming us more so, and we need to address it. Whereas in other areas saying, well, actually, this isn't harming us as much, and we can take a more bespoke approach rather than being a sort of one size fits all. I'm on one side of the fence or the other. For me, it's almost like what's best for each high street, and we need to be a bit tailored with that based on the data.
Yeah, and you mentioned the high street might have to become a smaller high street. Those units, so on the outer extremities, what's going to happen with them? You think they'll be turned into residential, or what's your view? Is that the way, that the direction that we're going?
It's different for different areas, and I think there's people have got a different thesis about where things are going post-COVID. I think there are a lot of investment opportunities in high street. We've been talking about more dynamic planning systems, and this is coming into play right now. I mean, people are sort of close to this around, PD rights is one of the reasons why a lot of people, in the real estate sector are very excited about the opportunity of conversion. But I think there was, really an increasing amount of buy-in, particularly accelerated by COVID again, from local authorities at the top, feeding down into planning teams that change needs to come, and we need to support positive change in a lot of areas. Yes, residential when there's a shortage of housing. In other areas, my view, from a flexible office space point of view, I think suburbia needs mini WeWorks and mini flexible workspaces,
sure.
because less people are going to commute than before, even if people are coming back. And I agree with you, people will come back, but not in the same numbers, not 5 days a week, everyone. And as a result, people are not going to want to work at home, are going to want to work, but they're going to want to work nearby. It's a big opportunity there. I talked a little bit earlier about warehousing and logistics spaces. It's been a hot market for a while, but I think last mile logistics presents opportunities. You talked about dark kitchens as well, so less front facing operations, but more behind the scenes serving local demand. So I think there are basically a lot of different uses, and I don't think it's a one size fits all. And then some people are like, oh, I'm a retail to resi developer. That's great. We'll find your opportunities. No, we can partner with you around it as well. Some high streets we're in, we'll help you find, which of those high streets where we believe this is going to be a great opportunity. And part of our sort of landlord toolkit, as I was saying before, is like, look, if you've got a vacant unit and we believe there's an opportunity for another tenant in there, we'll help you find that tenant and we'll help you fill it and make them successful. If you've got a vacant unit and we don't believe this should be high street, we'll tell you, and we've got people coming to us who want to sort of help those landlords that we work with repurpose their units or trade those units to other investors and developers who want to do something with it within sort of the wider remit of the high street plan we're putting in.
Mm.
So I think there's going to be different uses, and I think it's a great opportunity whether you're sitting on the asset today or you're looking in from the outside, even greater right now, opportunistically saying, do you know what? I'm willing to go in there and do the right thing for different high streets. I've got a strategy here, so I'm going to target the high streets around the edges where resi is an opportunity, or I'm going to target the high streets where other commercial uses are the opportunity, and really make that happen. And I'm really keen, and this, I'm really keen to connect with more of these investor developer types in the community who are actually saying, do you know what? I'm embracing change, and I see huge opportunity in change, and I want to be close to this because, as an organization, we haven't on our own got the capital to be able to reimagine, rebuild the high street. But actually, with the right sources of capital, the right individuals, organizations, together we can do some really special things in terms of the physical, real built world environment and the transformation of it. And in a lot of cases, it is going to be changing use.
And in terms of the time scale, I mean, clearly you have a mission there that's going to take some time to implement. What kind of time frame are you looking at in terms of, bringing all of these different stakeholders together and trying to kind of restructure the way we look at the traditional high street?
It's a good question, Gavin. I mean, just going back, I mean, we launched 2016, really the sort of early days, we didn't really know 100% sure how it was going to unfold. We were already building some technology in this market, to empower the businesses. We already had some good partnerships around that. And when we launched the movement, it sort of blew up. We were in the Sunday Times and the Times and the Mail and the Sunday Mail in the first 2 days over the weekend. It just went completely ballistic, and we were very high profile from a traditional media point of view quite quickly. And then JC Deco got behind us and put loads of ads all around the country about Save the High Street, which again puts us on another level.
Okay,
So we spent the first year really sort of building out the movement in terms of people coming together, doing a lot of research. We set up this High Street Advisory Board that was funded by sort of private sector, and then we went on our sort of journey around saying, well, where are the big problems here? What are the most important things? We've got this sort of distribution and this brand, and we sort of connected with something here, and we've got research and insight into the market. What are we hearing as the most important things to work on? And I think ultimately for me, and just intimately on my business, and I'm a very open person around this side of things, a lot of where we're prioritizing is saying, well, look, we've got, give or take 500,000, 500,000 high street units in the UK. We need to have a solution for every single one of those units. So if it's an occupied unit, we now have the most advanced digital support platform for small businesses in the UK that we've been building out since 2017. And it's a digital assistant. It uses an AI assistant, if you like, that learns about your business, gives you ideas and helps you put those ideas in place. It's like having a team without all the humans involved. And now we've got local authorities rolling that out for their local businesses in different parts of the UK. So making sure that every single local small business has Joe, which is the support platform, is a big priority for us. But then we've got the vacant units, and there's an increasing number of these vacant units in the UK. And we want to make sure that all those vacant units are either filled with a new business on the platform and supported to be successful, or they're repurposed into other uses, in which cases we talk about all these other opportunities economically around that as well. And then you've got the bigger units, which is really around all the micro mall stuff we were talking about
Former
earlier.
Debenhams and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and then we've got this sort of side remit, which is really important to us because it's kind of in our DNA, but it's also just important for us. It is even important commercially, where we're basically supporting what we call the local champion communities. So we're really at the grassroots here. We partner with people on the ground in their high streets to make change happen, and they provide us a voice on the ground. They're part of our team, and we're part of their team. And often it's a volunteer relationship both ways. Sometimes local authorities are funding us to set these up, set up a traders group, set up these things. But a lot of the time it's just us, and they're our friends. I mean, they're literally our friends, these busybodies on the high street, because we all talk the same language in my team and their team. And we're like a small team, but we're a really big team because we have this local champion community and people on the ground. So we want to continue building that out. We want to partner with every local authority, every LEP, every bid, every local community champion. We really, and a big focus of ours, and I know I was talking to you and getting some guidance from you, we really want to partner with really ambitious, forward-thinking developers who see positive change going on here and opportunities to start to really transform the physicality of these spaces, whether it's a micro mall distinct opportunity or whether it is about saying, look, we can actually help acquire and repurpose these units together in interesting ways. Or whether it is a larger scale regeneration project where you're saying, actually, I think there are going to be town centres around the UK that are undervalued, fundamentally undervalued. But if we took a long-term approach with it and we got access to the right kind of capital, we can do some really interesting things together. And for us, our approach here and our role here is we basically go from the ground up. We get all the local champion support, local authority support, all of that good stuff. But we actually look at every single one of those units in the same way I was talking about before. How do we make the tenanted, occupied units work? How do we fill the vacant units? How do we reimagine the bigger ones? So for us, reinventing and reviving the high street from our role point of view is done from the ground up. And we're just plowing on, unit by unit. Every single new unit we add is another part of changing the high street.
Alex, I wanted to just ask a question I ask all of my guests is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
That's a really good question. I was given some great advice once that really sort of stuck with me about decisions. One of my early sort of angel investors into our business, who built and scaled and sold a successful business. One thing he said to me that always stuck, and it still sticks today in my day-to-day, is there are decisions you can't go back on and there are decisions you can go back on. So as a CEO, always look at those decisions in that light, yeah? And if it's a decision you can go back on, move quickly. And if it's a decision you can't go back on, be purposeful and take your time on it. And so I think that's really helped, because I think a lot of times I look at small startup businesses and you say, well, why are they going to succeed against the big guys? Well, it's because they move quickly. It's because they make quick decisions about the things where they can move back on. And the mistakes that they can't go back on, they're more purposeful with. So whenever I'm addressing something, I always think, is that a decision I can go back on or not? And that kind of helps me go through here. I think that's a big one for me.
That's a good one, I think. Yeah. All right, Alex. We've been about an hour. How can people find you if they want to reach out and connect with you on some of these topics?
Yeah, well, Alex Schlagman on LinkedIn, Schlagman.
I'll put a link in the notes.
Yeah, exactly. And then my email is alex@savethehighstreet.org. Feel free to drop me a line anytime. Savethehighstreet.org is the website for the movement. There's another sort of website for the platform, which is joinjoe.com. But yeah, look, if you're seeing any opportunity around the transformation of the high streets from any side, yeah, do drop me a line. Happy to explore if there is something that we might be able to do together. And ultimately, be a part of not just the positive ESG type change, but be part of the positive commercial opportunities that are going on over the coming years.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Alex. It's certainly an uphill battle, but I do think he is certainly got the passion for dealing with all of the struggles that lie ahead. And I do think that there is going to be a lot of people out there who spot the opportunity. And like he said, the old Warren Buffett saying to get greedy when everyone else is fearful. It would seem like there is an awful lot of people walking away from retail right now. So it may well be the perfect time to go and jump back in. So anyway, guys, that is it for episode number 64 of Behind the Facade. Thank you so much for listening. As always, my number one ask is for you to leave a review or simply share the episode out with somebody who you think would benefit from it. In the show notes today, you'll find links to the various things discussed. I'll drop in Alex's LinkedIn profile and his email that he gave a short time ago, along with link to savethehighstreet.org and to his other website, joinjoe.com. If you have any questions or topics you would like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via the Facebook group Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, you will always find me on social media using the handle Gavin J. Gallagher, and that includes my YouTube channel, which you're probably getting sick and tired of listening to me plug every week. Anyway, lastly, guys, you can stay up to date with the various events and challenges and the masterclass mastermind that is going to be coming out soon. You'll find details for all of that on my website, so why not pop over and add your email to the email list. And you can get that at jgallagher.com/go. All right, folks, I hope to see you all again next week.